Engineers at the Naval Air Test Center thought someone must be joking when the order came to start measuring the C-130 Hercules in preparation for an aircraft carrier landing and launch test. With a wingspan of 132 feet, you couldn't imagine that the C-130 would be able to operate off of a flying deck only 1017 feet long and approximately 250 feet wide. Be that as it may, the division of the United States Navy expected to discover the feasibility of sitting down large planes on the carriers for cargo transportation. As US carriers fleets were being deployed around the world to increasingly more remote locations, the existing supply logistics were relying on the Grumman C-130, which were proven insufficient. Configured for carrier operations, the small twin-engine C-1 Grumman had comparatively limited range and payload capacity. To take care of the issue, the naval force amazed a group of shock pilots and engineers to solve how to land a colossal C-130 on the supercarrier USS Forrestal. Given the considerable uncertainty around the investigations, plans were made to throw the aircraft over the edge with the crane should it demonstrate unfit to take off once more. The USS Forrestal was a supercarrier commissioned in 1955 and named after the first Secretary of Defense James Forrestal. The vessel was the United States' first of its class and the United States' first supercarrier. Unlike the subsequent nickel carriers, the USS Forrestal harnessed conventional power. During its construction at Newport New Shipbuilding, the ship saw several design adjustments, including the replacement of a plain telescoping bridge for a traditional island structure. An angled landing deck and steam catapults were added to the flight deck, incorporating British design ideas. USS Forrestal was first launched on December 11, 1954. It entered service on October 1st of the following year. Sailors and officers affectionately refer to the vessel as the FID, short for First in Defense, and also a reference to the James Forrestal. After some notable fires aboard the ship, the USS Forrestal also gained the monikers Forest Fire, Firestall, and USS Zippo. The worst of these fires took place in 1967. The supercarrier served in the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Pacific Ocean for almost 4 decades. In the end, it was decommissioned and turned into a museum. Then it was ultimately towed to Brownsville, Texas, for scrap in February 2014. By December of the following year, the ship had been entirely scrapped. The massive C-130 Hercules was first used by the Navy in the 1960s. 4 of these aircrafts were on Antarctic missions. Those models feature skis, but soon after the Marine Corps procured 46 more Hercules planes for transport and to use as a serial tankers that can refuel fighter jets and attack planes. The aircraft was created after the United States Air Force Tactical Air Command sent in requirements for the Lockheed to generate a combat transport with turboprop engine. It first flew in the August of 1954 for the Air Force and in January of 1960 for the Navy. The tanker Hercules could refuel 2 other planes at the same time and could carry 3,600 gallons of fuel. Refueling happens through 2 detachable pylon pods located under the outer wing. Lockheed C-130F version of the Hercules entered service of the Navy in the Pacific on February 1, 1962. Plane was particularly useful for its ability to refuel aircraft, and several of the airframes were placed in the newly designated Marine Aerial Refuelers Transport Squadron 152 under the Marine Corps. Still, the United States Armed Forces wondered whether the Hercules can be deployed from the water rather than land to facilitate long-range cross-continental missions. C-2 Greyhound is presently still one of the largest transport aircraft designed for carrier operations before the plane ended its service. However, the military was curious to see whether the C-130 Hercules could be used for logistical support by taking off and landing on a carrier. Tests using the Hercules and supercarrier USS Forrestal were scheduled for October of 1963. The theory behind the novel test was named Carrier On-Board Delivery, or COD. The concept was created following the realization that aircraft carriers should be resupplied with urgently needed fuels and tools without having to return to the pole. Commencing in the early 1960s, the Grumman C-130 was actually in charge for supplying the carriers. However, the twin-piston engine had 2 flaws that limited the operations: the 300-mile range and the 8,500-pound payload capacity. Chief of Naval Operations, the most senior naval officer in the Department of the Navy, wanted a bigger transport plane to land on the USS Forstall. He ordered the feasibility study to determine whether the C-130 Hercules could be used as a carrier onboard delivery aircraft. Aside from both greater range and payload capacity, Hercules was a more stable and reliable aircraft. If it would replenish the carriers in the middle of the ocean, it would resolve multiple concerns. One of the crew members which was chosen for this mission said, as code, they could not find a C-130 crew interested in going to the port, so the Naval Air Test Center selected 2 fighter pilots who couldn't even spell propeller. They gave us the keys to Marine KC-130. The team also stated that their preparation for the historical moment was rather brief. As quote, we had only one 4-hour familiarization flight with the Lockheed chief test pilot before making exactly 100 test landings on the runway at Patuxent River. Despite the quick preparation and experimental nature of the project, Lieutenant Flatley made history by landing the Hercules transport plane on the deck of the USS Forstall in 1963. The test broke the record by using the Hercules as the largest onboard aircraft to successfully land and take off from an aircraft carrier. The only modifications Lockheed made on the aircraft C-130 was giving it a smaller nose landing gear hole and upgraded anti-skid braking system. They also removed the underlying refueling pods. They carried out these changes soon before conducting the tests. In total, the team made 21 full stop landings and 29 touch and go landings during 4 distinct trips. For the first test, they traveled off the coast of the Jacksonville, Florida and conducted a test on October 30. The USS Forstall flight deck was cleared and the arresting wires were removed. Because the Hercules lacked the tail hook, the weather complicated the mission since the crew had to deal with 40 knots winds and gusting up to 60 knots. Despite these difficulties, they were resolute in their purpose. The Hercules had to approach the USS Forstall a total of 42 times that day to conduct 19 touch and go landings. The rest of the tests were conducted in moderately rough seas, about 500 nautical miles or 930 kilometers of the coast of the Boston on the North Atlantic Ocean. These November 8 tests broke the record for the largest and the heaviest planes to ever land on the aircraft carrier. To carry out these tests, pilot put the propellers in reverse pitch while he was still 10 or 15 feet in the air to land. At the moment of the touchdown, the Hercules was placed in the full reverse and brought to a stop in 270 feet. That first landing, the Hercules weighed about 85,000 pounds, but the ambitious testing required increasing the weight up to 121,000 pounds for the maximum weight test. The crew had 745 feet to take off and 460 feet to land. At that point, the Hercules wingtip was only 15 feet away from the ship's control, leaving no margin for any mistake. And finally, no room for error. After the record for the biggest aircraft to land on an aircraft carrier was broken, it was realized that it was indeed possible to land a Hercules on a supercarrier. Doing so would be impractical and infeasible for regular operations. The room for error was simply too narrow. Furthermore, Hercules was too big to put on an elevator or stay in the hangars, which meant traveling by sea with it would require significant modifications if it could even be done. By 1966, the C-2 Greyhound program was operational, addressing most of the concerns that these tests were seeking to zone into. For his record-breaking actions, pilot was given the Distinguished Flying Cross. The Hercules plane, the US, was deployed to the Vietnam and later on to the Middle East for the Operation Desert Storm and the Iraqi Freedom. It was finally retired in 2003 to the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida.